Doing all right? Managing to stay on top of your work with this?
Yes.
Good. Good, good. Okay, so today we're going to look at the importance of modeling, in our case obviously physical activity and correct motor skills as best we can, all right? But modeling is actually a really important concept to consider in all domains, okay? So we'll talk a little about that. Let me pull up this. No, not that one. This one. Okay. Okay. So, when we're looking at the research and the information that we have on modeling, it's very positive, the impacts that we can have on the children. So last time around I showed you the difference in their heart rates and their activity counts when they were out on the playgrounds with adults who were not modeling versus out on the playground in a mastery climate with me and students who were playing and engaging in the skill set. All right, so have a little bit of a deeper look at that idea. So some of the background behind, again, why we all feel, in my world, why we feel that it's really important that we start to make a bigger impact on these children. 60%, and this data is a little old, so it may even be more than 60% now, or less. 60% of US children 3 to 5, so what we would consider preschoolers, spend most of the day in some form of daycare, be it an actual formal preschool setting or some kind of childcare setting. And as I've mentioned before, about 80% of the day in a preschool setting is spent in behaviors and activities that are predominantly sedentary. So whilst we think about preschool children as having a lot of energy and being very lively, the curriculum often constrains them into behaviors where they're not allowed to run around, okay? We've mentioned that the prevalence of overweight and obesity among 4 to 5-year-olds is really on the rise. And habits are an important idea. You know, when we're little, when we're toddlers and preschoolers, we're not only developing the habit of reading and the habit of maybe language and manners and things like that, but we're learning habits that are going to impact our long-term health. So eating habits, foodstuffs, which foods will I try, which foods won't I try? You know, a lot of people hate, one of my sisters hates broccoli, says she hates broccoli, but she eats it when she's in my house. But she hates broccoli because my dad, bless his cotton socks, overcooks broccoli and dishes up broccoli that is yellow. And broccoli is not supposed to be yellow. And I don't blame her for thinking she doesn't like broccoli, because that's what she grew up with, right? So we're developing these eating habits as well as physical activity habits. You know, is physical activity something I just do, like brushing my teeth, or is it something I have to actually think about and plan for, right? And we've seen research that indicates that physical activity tracks through childhood. So if they're more physically active at 3, 4, and 5, they tend to be more physically active at 6, 7, and 8. Okay? I mentioned last week, or maybe earlier this week, that inactive children tend to become
Inaudible device.
Sorry, is everything okay?
Do you want me to go knock on the door and ask him to come out for lunch? I'm gonna come lunch on my way down there. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Kayla, can you turn your microphone off?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I mentioned that inactive children tend to become inactive adults. Part of that is because they don't develop the skill set to feel comfortable with movement and sport as they get older. An important point to remember is that by the age of 4, we see that girls are already more sedentary than boys are, by 4. So that data is really old, and it isn't changing, which is disappointing to say the least. The new TGMD3, when they were collecting the data for the normative tables for that TGMD3, the researcher who's responsible for that thought that what he was going to see, so in TGMD2, he had to have, when we get to the ball skill subset, he had to have sets of tables for boys and sets of tables for girls, because the girls' object control ball skill was so far behind, so less developed than the boys. And that was in 2000. So he said that when he was starting TGMD3 and he was collecting the data to make the normative tables, that he honestly thought that in 20 years we would have made some progress. And that what he thought was going to happen was he would only need one set of tables for children for ball skills. That is not what happened, right? When they analyzed the data and they teased the data out, they still had to have a set of tables for boys and a set of tables for girls. So it doesn't look as though in 20 years we've made much progress at all in getting girls more active and more engaged with a wide range of movement skills, not just ballet or hopping or skipping, right? So that's a little disappointing, right? One of the problems that we have is that many daycare teachers, even those who have early childhood degrees, because I've taken quite a few early childhood classes, so I know the kind of information that they're being given, and often what their belief system tells them is that when the children are outside on the playground, that is time for autonomy. That's their time to not be controlled by an adult. And that the adult's role on the playground is to make sure the children stay safe. And that's it. Okay? So the problem with that is when we look at the modeling data and our motor skill data, we see that an adult, the teacher, has this huge impact on the behaviors that we see the children perform on the playground, right? So we need to try to change this perception and get the teachers to understand that they need to be modeling physical activity as well, right? And that motor skills and toys can encourage the children to become more physically active and more engaged, right? Because if when the children go outside and the teacher believes typically her, but there are some male early childhood teachers, which is great, we need more of them, right? The picture that the children see when they think their role is to oversee the safety is they'll often sit down, or they'll at least stand back and just stand still and watch everybody, right? So they're modeling sedentary behavior, which implies that going outside doesn't mean being physically active, that going outside means being as sedentary as being inside, right? So it's a really big problem because they don't feel that their active participation is going to make a difference. And this harks back to something I said at the beginning of the semester, which is 2.5 weeks away already, is that there isn't enough conversation amongst disciplines, right? In the motor behavior, motor development world, we have heaps and heaps of research and literature that says teachers should do this. If we want children engaged, we have to be engaged, right? But in the daycare world, in the early childhood world, that information doesn't cross over very often, right? Unless you have an early childhood faculty member who's really big on movement, they're not getting the information that we have, right? As I said, I have tried for 14 years to get the early childhood students at Eastern New Mexico to come and take this class. And I've got nowhere. Well, that's not quite true. I have got to the point where the early childhood faculty will invite me over to give a mini lecture. It's not the same as a whole semester worth of information, right? So, we'll talk a little bit more, one of the chapters in the book looks in quite a lot of depth at the idea of significant others. So, significant others in an individual's life change across the lifespan. But when they're small, right, when we're looking at toddlers, preschoolers, kindergartners, early elementary grades, their significant others are the adults who spend the most amount of time with them. So in certain daycare situations, I remember there was a daycare near the university when I was in school that literally opened 24 hours a day. So there were children that were there a lot of hours of their day. So the teachers can become the significant other, not just the parent or parents or formal caregiver. Okay? So what we know is that we can have a lot of effect by modeling this idea of motor playfulness, right? It's got to be fun, and playing is fun. So we have to be careful with our language. We have to make sure that we don't tell them off for doing something that they were experimenting in. Now, if they're deliberately hurting someone, that's a different kettle of fish, right? But if they're experimenting and they accidentally hurt someone, then I have to be careful not to tell them off for that. We still have to have sorries and tears and what have you, but I can't tell them off for experimenting, right? That's not a good mindset to take, okay? We need to model motor playfulness. So this is me back in grad school being very silly, right? We need to model the desired behavior, right? So we have to give them the picture. So let's go back to our MSU chart and our throwing. We know that stage 1 of throwing is this. Stage 2 of throwing is this. Stage 3 of throwing is this. Stage 4 of throwing is this. Stage 5, we finally get something that's looking a little bit like a real throw, right? If I'm playing at the throwing station, I have to model stage 5 or higher, so that their little brains are unconsciously getting this information about what throwing should look like, right? That means that, for example, in my case, I've had to work quite hard at my throwing to try to make sure that when I throw in front of the children, I remember to take an oppositional step. It means that I often avoid playing the catching station because my catching is abysmal and that's not what I want to model to them, right? It means that sometimes you have to spend your summers or your Christmas, if the next year in your lesson plans you're going to try frisbee golf and you can't throw a frisbee, then you need to spend some time learning to throw a frisbee. Or find someone who can model that. Worst case scenario, find video that the children could watch that acts as modeling for them, right? So modeling doesn't mean I take over their motor play. It means I join in and I facilitate their motor play. They still have to be in charge, right? So as I said, depending upon the age group, they may start games, right? Pretend games on the playground with the toys. That's okay, right? As long as they're moving and they're using the toys and they're getting some experience, it doesn't matter whether they're pretending to be on the train to Albuquerque so they can go shopping, or whether they think that they're the next baseball hero, right? It doesn't matter, as long as they're playing and they're engaged and they're practicing, right? So the first point here is really important. We've touched on it a little bit, but it's it's critical that when you set up a task for them to experience, that you set it up with varying levels of challenge, all right? Because if you only set one level of challenge, then it's going to be too easy for some of the children, teenagers, adults. It doesn't matter who you're working with, the concept stays the same, right? If I only set one level, some people are going to be bored, other people are going to struggle and maybe fail. And the failing is a problem because then they quit. Being bored is a problem because then they quit and they don't practice, right? So we have to be sure to set up activities with lots of different levels of challenge, okay? We also need to take into account the different backgrounds of the children in our class. So it's quite helpful if you can get to know the children as best you can, so that you know what's home like, you know, where do they come from, you know, what kinds of, so if I have a child in class who comes from India, do I only do baseball? Or maybe sometime I'll do a cricket lesson. And that child would have the opportunity to be the person in the class that knows what cricket is like, right? Things like that. So it's important If you go to work, you know, when you finish with school and you go out into the world, if you end up somewhere like this where we have Canon, we have people from all over the world going to Canon, so we've got people from all over the world teaching on ENMU. So the children in the CDC aren't all southern, you know, southwestern American kids, right? They come from all over the place, okay? So, sadly, I'm still trying to work out how I can give you some kind of experience of what the playground is like. If you were here, when we go out onto the playground and we run our motor skill intervention, we have very specific aims, goals for that, right? The first is to improve their fundamental motor skill competency, and the second is to increase their physical activity levels, right? So that means that if we can become a player, right, if I'm on the equipment with them, so if there's an obstacle course, instead of standing at the side going, oh, good job now, what are you going to do here? Are you going to go over or are you going to go under, right? Instead of engaging them by being with them, engage them by, I'm the person that's crawling through the tunnel or climbing over the hurdle, right? Again, my mastery climate, the next lecture, I've got to work out how to set the next lecture up. I'm not giving the next lecture, it's a colleague of mine, and I have it on DVD. I'm not sure if there's a way of me to download that into the Collaborate or even onto Blackboard. So I've got to work that out this afternoon. But with a mastery climate, we're trying to make that as much of a play session as possible, where the children feel like they don't sometimes even recognize that I've been out there for half an hour setting up stations on the playground. They just think the toys just kind of evaporate on their own, right? They just appear. So they need to be in charge as much as possible. They need to have a choice of what they do and when they do it. If they're sitting down, I'm going to do my damnedest to encourage them not to sit down, but I'm not going to tell them they can't sit down, right? But I'm going to make them really wish they were up with me playing, okay? Fly in here, that's driving me crackers. So for example, that can mean that sometimes one of the stations doesn't have any activity going on. All the children are playing with the other toys. If I notice that and I go over and I start playing with the toys at this other station, eventually some of the children are going to go, oh, that looks like fun, let's go have a go. Right? So I'm not quite sure what to expect this semester because I haven't taught this class for a year. Previously I taught it every semester, every year. So the kids knew me, the teachers knew me. There are always children that had had PE the semester before. So they get really excited when they see me come into the building because they know they're going to get to go outside and do stuff they're not normally given an opportunity to do, okay? And the more we engage and the more we show how much we enjoy movement, the more the children see it as a fun session and activity, right? I get very, very few children refuse either to come out on the playground or to play when they're out there. You always get a child that's unusual, but it doesn't happen a lot. Most kids love the motor skill intervention. They love to come out and play with the students and with me, okay? So if we want them to engage, we have to engage. Okay? If the adults don't show any enthusiasm, so this is an interesting point. When I taught this in Auburn to early childhood people, they were very ready to engage appropriately with the children, to get down to their eye level, to talk with language that the children understood. But they were a bit uncomfortable about joining in the physical activity and the motor skills. What I have found with the HPE students is they don't always use appropriate language or appropriate behaviors for little people, but it's easy to get them to play and to throw a ball and to run around the running road, right? Because HPE students love to move. So it's a different set of circumstances teaching it here, okay? Oh, that's me again, by the way. Right? So we have to keep them engaged, chat with them, play games with them. So a lot of the information I'm giving you in lab is geared to the fact that we would have been on a playground with preschool people. Doesn't mean that there isn't literature and information about the effect of modeling on many other age groups, all right? There is particularly a big set of research on modeling with school children that indicates that we should not be that teacher or that adult that says, you know, do as I say, not as I do, right? What kind of PE teachers did you experience in school, okay? What we know is that there are still some very old school PE teachers out there who don't really engage in PE, right? They just give out balls, roll the ball out, let the students do what they want, okay? We really have to model. It's a crucial form of communication. Not all people, individuals, are oral learners, right? A lot of us learn by watching, seeing, and then doing, okay? So there's a lot more learning to be had if I'm modeling the activity as well as explaining it verbally. Okay. And it isn't just school children, right? It's you guys as well, okay? Think about how you would feel, what you would say in your mind. Maybe you would say it out loud, but probably not, right? But what would you feel if I say to you, you mustn't drink and drive, right? It's really bad. Don't do that. Do not drink and drive. And then you see me at the pub drinking 3 beers and then walking out and getting in my car and driving home, right? The next time I tell you don't drink and drive, what's going to go on in your head? What will you say to yourself? What do you think?
Personally, the way it sounded, I like, and Dr. Walk knew it, and she's fine, then why can't I do it too?
Okay, right. Some of you might go, bleeding hypocrite. I just saw her drinking and driving. What does she think she's doing telling me not to drink and drive? Right? Or if we tone it down and I say, do not drink soda. Don't drink soda, it's bad for you. Drink water or milk or fruit juice or fizzy water and fruit juice. Right? And then you walk into my office and there's a great big crate of Coca-Cola bottles. You'll never see me drink soda. So, I'm okay on that one. Right? Okay? So it isn't just modeling. Same in class. Right? We talk about modeling being enthusiastic on the playground, but if I'm in class going, yeah, modeling's really important, and you have to be ready to model the skills, but you're all asleep by now. It's not very engaging, right? So PE literature shows that teachers in the gym who are personally, physically fit and active in their outside of school life tend to be more effective PE teachers. The kids in their classes pay more attention to them because they're fit and in shape and they can do the skills, right? They also tend to include more fitness type activities as well as motor skill activities within their curriculum. We do have to be a little bit careful there. There was a big swing for a while where PE became fitness class. And you've got to be careful to get a good balance. PE has to provide motor skill instruction. If we don't teach them how to perform the skills, then they're not going to maintain any kind of physical activity to become fit and healthy. Okay? So it's really important that we balance that, and I think the pendulum has swung into a much more balanced position right now from what I hear from colleagues and what I see. Right? So, children, stroke people, imitate someone they admire or they like a lot, right? So, who was or is your role model for the sport and the physical activity that you take part in, right? Mine was Olga Korbut and the military at the 72 Olympics. I watched them do gymnastics on the telly and I was like, I want to do that. And I nagged my parents rotten until they registered me at a gym, right? So that I could go and learn to do what they were doing, right? So think back, why did you start the sport and the activity that you do, right? Did you start because you, like me, you saw someone and you were like, oh, that's so cool, I want to try that. Did you do it because you have a sibling who's involved? So a lot of people will play the sport that their older brother or sister play, right? Because mum makes the older sibling take the younger sibling with them, get them out of her hair, right? And so they end up playing as well. Or it might just be they just love their older brother or sister so much they want to do what they're doing. It could be a teacher or a coach, right? So we want to model healthy lifestyle behaviors and we want to model motor skill competency. So, I've said this already, right? You want to model the correct behavior as best we can. If we just can't pull it off, we need to find someone in the class who can show the rest of the kids in class how to do the skill, right? If you don't have anyone that can do if you can't do a cartwheel, but you want to teach the kids to do a cartwheel, you need to find someone who can do a cartwheel to show them. Right? So if you have to resort to video, use another student, pull another adult in from outside the classroom to come and show them. Right? Model the behaviors you want to see. Model the language you want to hear. Model the manners you expect to occur in your classroom. You've got to do it all, because if you break with the expectation you're putting on them, then that expectation doesn't mean anything anymore. Right? So join in, model the skilled use, the competency of the motor skill, model how much fun it is being able to throw a ball well, or hit a ball well, or run fast, right? Then if we can do that to enough children at a young enough age, we may be able to impact this overweight and obesity trend that we're seeing. Fun. It's just fun. Right? So, questions? Questions? Okay, there are a couple of sets of handouts to read around this, and they're all real easy practitioner level. They're not kind of highbrow research articles, and they're up on Blackboard for you. The first one is coaches and teachers as active role models, and then there's never too old to play ball, and physical educator, role model, or roll the ball out. Okay. So make sure that you go and dig those out of the resources that are up on Blackboard for you, and read through those articles for me. Okay? Any questions? Comments? Experience?
No questions for me.
Say that again, sorry?
No questions for me, it's all good.
No questions? Okay. Experiences. So also be thinking, do you have any experiences that would validate or support what I'm saying, right? Be thinking about that. Share that, because you don't want just my experience, right? You've got to start trying to tie this information back to your own experience so that it means something to you.
Well, the way that I started to play basketball was because my brothers play basketball.
Okay.
And I would always see them play basketball, so that made me interested in it as well. And then the more that I played it, the more that I started to enjoy it. So it's kind of similar to, they were my first teachers in a way.
Right. Perfect. Okay, that's perfect. That's Ibn talking, by the way, for the rest of you that don't know him. That's exactly it, right? Most of us fall into the things we enjoy doing because we followed someone else. Not always, sometimes it's just like mum signs you up for ballet class, and then you find out you love dancing, right? That didn't really involve much of a role model to get going, but it might involve a role model to remain in class and keep showing up, right? Okay. Well, that's all I have for you for today. Keep an eye out on Blackboard. As I said, I've got to work out how to present the lecture from my colleague for Friday's class. So once I work that out, I will send out either an email or an announcement to let you guys know where to go, what to look for, etc. for Friday. Okay? And other than that, I will see you tomorrow morning. Okay? Have a good afternoon.